Good morning. Hello, this is Dano with the Uke Club Daily Ukulele Workout Office Hours. I have been saying the date on these, but somebody sent me a note and said, hey, you really shouldn't put the date on those because if I watch it a year from now, it's going to look like, I'm getting really old news. So this is Dano at the Uke Club from an unspecified time, perhaps even right this very moment. We are recording, so you will be able to watch this in playback. As always, I have a quick little ukulele lesson planned for you today. There were a couple of things that came up on the Facebook group that I wanted to address quickly. I posted the question, what are your goals for the month? And several good answers came through. Some of them very specific, so I thought I would just address those right now. So there is a document answering those questions. Now I feel like a radio talk show host. A longtime listener, first-time caller, Deborah, asked about a G to an E minor transition, and she got a very astute answer from Todd. But I thought if it were easier to view it in video, I'll do it here. So her problem was getting to from the G chord to the E minor chord without having an awkward pause as part of the transition. In general, you can smooth out any chord transition by slowing it down. And when you slow it down enough, you'll have all the time you need to make that transition. Then it becomes a question of putting in the time and the practice so that you can bring that up to speed for whatever songs you're working on. Now, as Todd pointed out in his answer, there is a shortcut, and there very often is a shortcut that you can find to make that a little bit easier. Why this particular chord transition? It's a very common chord transition. G and E minor are relative, major and minor to each other, so they come up all the time together. There's that 1950s chord pattern. So that's G, E minor, C, D7. So those two chords come up all together, all the time together. So it's good to have a strategy. And here, in close-up, is what Todd was talking about. Here's your G chord. Two of your fingers of the G chord are already covering two of the strings you need for the E minor. Those two. So by simply adding the third note of the E minor, you can use your little finger. Now you've got that diagonal slash that makes an E minor. The trick is you don't have to release the G. You can hold your G and just add the pinky for the E minor. G, E minor. G, E minor. Got it? Next question, a longtime listener, first-time caller. There we go. Let me go back to one of the other questions on Facebook. Oh, it was actually Todd's question that I wanted to answer. Todd, you were asking about transitioning from some 3-finger chords to some 4-finger chords. And the specific one you asked about, sorry, give me a second here. You mentioned an F sharp minor to a C diminished 7. So Todd, feel free to chime in if I'm not answering your question the way you meant it. But it seems to me like what you're saying is, here's an F sharp minor, and here's a C diminished. Is there an easy way to do that, or is there an easier way to do that? So, first of all, one thing you can do is learn that there's another note you can add into that F sharp minor. So that would give you an anchor point if you decided to add that note at fret 4 as you shift to the diminished chord. There. Nope. There it is. F sharp minor. And then by using your little finger as a slip, that one stays on and slips down as the others go into place. Now I know that was just an example and that probably you're asking in more of a general way, so I'll answer in more of a general way. My view is you should always try to find those anchor fingers. That's a good example. Because when you've got to rejigger all your fingers into a new shape, it is hard. And if you can find those spots, going back to the one we were just talking about, G to E minor, what you don't see, those are completely different chord shapes, right? G and E minor. And when you look at the chords on the page with the dots laid out, it takes a lot of brain power to recognize that there is any similarity between those two chords at all. So that's one thing to struggle with, is to look at it and see what can you find in common. And if there's anything in common, use it to your advantage. So one way to find, let me go to a much simpler version. Let's say G to D7. So that's a 3-finger chord to a 4-finger chord. And they don't seem to have much in common. But again, that dot that's part of the D7 is also part of, it's not part of the G. Let me take that back. So here you are. But you've got a couple of different possible movements as you get from one to the next. One is to think in terms of what fret stays in common as you switch from one chord to the next. So in G, as I switch to D, well, in this case, both frets are in common. The whole chord is made at fret 2 and 3. I'm kind of over-explaining this. Another way to think about it is what strings are in common. So like we were doing with F sharp minor, that string stays in common as you move to the next chord. So I always try to find a fret in common or a chord in common, if possible, to ease the transition. And then, I hate to say it, it goes back to what I said a minute ago. Slow it way, way, way down to the point that you can do it at ridiculous slow speed, and then slowly build it back up. So that's a little vague, but hopefully I answered your specific chord question and maybe gave you some general tips to work your way through on. And then we'll leave it at that. And I'll jump into the other stuff that I had scheduled for today. So, hi to the folks who have just joined in. Steve is here. Danny, good. All right. This is what I wanted to talk about for a few minutes today. I'm going to play Obladi, Oblada by the Beatles. And my goal is not to teach you how to play that song. The reason I want to show it to you is because as I was fooling around with this song recently, it occurred to me that there's a lot going on in a very simple song. And one of the questions that comes up all the time is, what strum pattern should I use for this song, whatever song I happen to be playing? What's the strum pattern? And you've heard me lecture on this before, that any song can be played with any strum pattern. And ultimately what you want is to not be thinking in terms of strum patterns at all. You want to have a fluid hand movement that changes on the fly to meet the needs of the song. What are the needs of the song? Well, the needs of the song are going to vary based partly on the way you hear the song in your mind. You're going to want to play it the way you want to play it. That may come from, a song like Obladi Oblada. You've probably heard 20,000 times in your life. In fact, the Beatles heard it 20,000 times. Supposedly that was one of the reasons they couldn't stand each other at the end. It's because Paul McCartney kept making them rehearse Obladi Oblada. So, but if you have a sound from a recording in your mind, you may want to be trying to emulate that as closely as possible. So there are a couple of things that we're up against. We're up against a tiny little instrument that's never going to sound like a band. It's never going to sound like a guitar where you've got bass notes and a great long neck full of notes waiting to happen. So let me kind of walk through what I'm talking about here. I'm not going to try to play it as a performance. I'm going to break it down into pieces as we go. So the first part is the very distinctive bass line. We don't have bass strings, but we can get Desmond has a barrow in the marketplace. Dolly is a singer in the band. Da 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 da. Obla-dee, obla-da, life goes on, brah. La la, how the life goes on. So that's pretty straightforward all through there. In other words, I'm not changing my pattern too much. I've got it and I've locked into it. I will walk you through that and show you more what I'm doing there in a minute. But as it comes out of that and goes into the next section, I do want to change my strumming. In a couple of years, they have built a home sweet home. With a couple of kids running in the yard, Desmond and Molly Jones. Happy ever after in the... So, two things that happened there. One is I completely changed my strumming. I went from kind of a picking thing to a strumming thing. And at the end of that little phrase, I fumbled it a bit, but I stopped and paused. I can't do both at the same time. I stopped strumming altogether. With a couple of kids running in the yard of Desmond and Molly Jones. Happy ever after. That's something that many ukulele players are afraid to do. Stop strumming. Stop being afraid of stopping strumming. It's not uncommon at all in music. Desmond and Molly Jones. It just gives you a good moment of drama. So that's my encouragement right there, to don't feel like you've got to be strumming and making noise all the time. Second thing, don't feel like you've got to be locked in to a particular pattern. I think this song is a good example of it because the two sections are so very, very different that it's very conspicuous. Now, if you're curious, I'll show you what that little bum, 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 bum thing is. Another reason I like this is because it makes you think about some of the other stuff that we talk about a lot. Here are the chords: C, F, G7. So first of all, I'm playing the song without music. I just worked it out the other night. It's our good old 1-4-5, C, D, E, F, and G. In this case, a G7 by choice. I don't know what the Beatles used. So 1-4-5. So that's a bit of knowledge from our past. There is an A minor that falls in there at one point, but otherwise it's a 1-4-5 song. Another bit of useful knowledge from the past. So we're playing in C. Desmond has a barrow. The bit of knowledge is, if you don't know how to do the finger picking, or if you don't know the second position chords, which I'm about to talk about, you don't need them. You can always simplify. Desmond has a barrow in the marketplace. Molly is a singer in the band. Went to the wrong chord. So now it's just a strumming song. But one of the things I love to encourage is get away from ukulele strumming whenever you can. That's the sound of the ukulele. It's so typical that it's what makes the ukulele potentially boring. So remember our second position C chord It's our B flat shape moved up. B flat. Haha, Jerry. Yeah, that's what makes it a ukulele. So third fret, it becomes a C chord. B flat, B, C. All right. And just like in several other songs that we've looked at, you don't necessarily have to play all 4 strings. I'm going to abbreviate it right here with only 2 strings and then alternate on string 3. So that's the bass line. Dum, dum. We're going to fill it in with, so thumb, finger, thumb, finger. Let me leave out the hammer-on. It's not really a hammer-on, it's just a new note added. Let me leave it out so you see how the thumb finger works. That's it. It's just those 2 middle strings. But when you alternate every other one, adding that note, Desmond has a barrow in the, Desmond has a barrow in the. So another reason I like this song as an example of what we're talking about here today, which is basically adding variety, choosing to add variety, is that as you change chords, you can't keep that bouncy sound going, but you can keep that bouncy beat going. There would be a way to get the ukulele version of the bass line of that song as we change chords, but that's more work and effort than I care to put into it right now. By keeping the feel of the beat the same, though, I feel like it does a good enough job. Desmond has a barrow in the marketplace. So you see, now I'm not alternating that low note. I'm keeping it the same. If you know the song well, you know that it really needs to keep the same alternating bounce. But by keeping the consistent pattern of the right hand, it's good enough for what we're doing. Desmond has a barrow in the market, G7. Molly is a singer in the band. Now, if you find that too much of the same once you get down to the G7, well, that's the lesson for today. Change it, alter it. Now I'm reaching up with my thumb to grab string 4. Or do a little rake for one of your thumb downs. Molly is a singer in the band. And you're back to that. Desmond says to Molly, girl, I like your face. F says this as she takes him by the hand. All right. Let me walk you into the next section of the song, and we'll wrap this up. From a C to a C7. So at some point in there is where I want to transition into a more loose strum. It's coming out of oh-blah-dee, oh-blah-da, life goes on, brah, la-la, how the life goes on. C7, in a couple of years they have built. You hear how it just sort of changes over a couple of beats. Let me do it for you one more time. Life goes on, brah, la-la, how the life goes on. In a couple of years they have built a home sweet. And a couple of kids running in the yard of Desmond and Molly Jones. Now, right there, I didn't do the pauses the same way that I did before. Before, I left a great wide open pause. This time I just dropped it off and played the one beats. Your choice. You get to do it as you see fit. I also threw in a little walk down. Which we'll talk about in more detail another time if you're interested. But it's another way to fill in the space. If you haven't got the skill for that walk down, but yet you're hearing it in your head from the recording that you know so well, let that influence your strumming at that point. In a couple of years, they have built a home sweet. So it's slight changes, subtle, but everything that you add in that's different is interesting. It's not necessarily good, you know, it's like modern art. It may catch your eye and it may be interesting and you may not like it at all. But it's better for you to make an informed decision about what you want to do. Try it, see if you like it, and stick with it. I'm reading a great autobiography of A.A. Milne, the guy who wrote Winnie the Pooh, but also wrote a lot of very interesting, fun, and funny adult books. And his autobiography, I've only read the first 3 pages of the introduction. He says, I hope you like this, but I'm writing it for me, basically. And he says it in a much more amusing way. So I sort of feel like you get to make those choices when you play ukulele. Obviously, you want to bear in mind the experience of your listener, but especially while you're learning, you want to have it be interesting to you, interesting at a skill level and interesting at an ear level. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I'm happy to take any questions on that or anything else related to our ukulele stuff. As always, I appreciate you guys being here. I'm going to shut off the recording now and hang out for another minute or two.